A research boat on Lake Michigan, a dredge sample pulled up from 6 meters down. Divers who worked this same stretch of lakebed 20 years ago say it used to be armored, edge to edge, in sharp-edged shells. Now the dredge comes up with rock, just rock. Zebra mussels made up 98% of the mussels in this lake 25 years ago. Today, on hard bottom like this, they've been pushed under 3%. Every viral video about this asks the same question: what mystery predator is hunting the zebra mussels? A comeback story. Nature striking back after 30 years of losing. That story is wrong. What actually happened is stranger, better documented in peer-reviewed research, and it isn't good news. This isn't a small story. The species involved shape drinking water for tens of millions of people, and the outcome of this fight is still being measured today. Peer-reviewed research names 3 real predators here. A 4th species, never mentioned in any of the popular videos, turns out to matter more than any of them. June 1988, Lake St. Clair, the narrow strait between Lake Huron and Lake Erie. A freighter from the Black Sea region empties its ballast tanks. Inside, invisible to the naked eye, zebra mussel larvae. By 1990, just 2 years later, zebra mussels had been confirmed in every one of the 5 Great Lakes. No control program on Earth had ever moved that fast. They attach to anything hard: rock, dock pilings, boat hulls, the inside of steel pipes, using threads of protein strong enough to survive a Great Lakes winter and resist being pried off by hand. Recreational boaters felt it too. Hulls left in the water for a season came out coated in razor-sharp shells that had to be scraped off by hand every single year, or the boat wouldn't move right. By the early 1990s, they were clogging water intake pipes at power plants and treatment facilities across 4 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Some intake pipes narrowed by more than half their original diameter. Congressional researchers estimated the toll on the power industry alone at $3.1 billion between 1993 and 1999. Cumulative damage across every affected industry, from 1989 to 2004, has been put as high as $5 billion. Direct annual damage to power plants and water systems still runs $300 to $500 million a year. Municipal water utilities serving lakeside cities had to redesign intake screens and add mechanical scraping schedules that didn't exist before 1988, permanent line items in budgets that never had one. 3 decades later, simply managing dry-cynid mussels in the Great Lakes region costs an estimated $500 million every single year, a permanent line item with no end date. The 5 Great Lakes hold roughly 20% of the world's surface fresh water, spread across 8 states and 1 Canadian province. An invasive species that takes hold here doesn't stay contained. It never has. Engineers tried chlorine dosing, physical scraping, filtration screens, even electrified barriers. Every method worked at the scale of 1 pipe. None of them worked at the scale of a lake 300 miles long. For 30 years, nothing humans tried put a lasting dent in the population. Then, with no new program and no new funding, the numbers started falling on their own. Since 2013, the U.S. Geological Survey's Lake Erie Biological Station has run bottom trawl surveys of the lake's western basin, twice a year, every June and September, using the same gear at the same coordinates. It's not glamorous work. Researcher Kevin Koretz and colleagues spent a decade counting fish, weighing catches, and cutting open stomachs, the kind of data set that only starts to say something after 10 straight years of repetition. What they found inside those stomachs, trawl after trawl, pointed toward one native fish doing far more work than anyone had given it credit for. By the time the pattern was undeniable, 3 separate candidates were already sitting in the scientific literature, published years apart by different teams on different lakes. None of them had been trying to solve the same mystery. None of the 3 papers cite each other as the answer. Each one only claims its own small piece: 1 fish, 1 bird, 1 lake. Nobody had stacked all 3 side by side before. The freshwater drum is not exotic. It's a common, unglamorous Great Lakes native, gray, blunt-headed, thrown back by anglers for 100 years as a trash fish nobody wanted to eat. But the drum has something almost no other fish in the Great Lakes has: a second set of jaws in its throat, pharyngeal teeth strong enough to crush a mollusk shell whole in a single bite. Research from the USGS Great Lakes Science Center found the smallest drum able to crack a zebra mussel shell measures 265 millimeters, about 10 inches. Past 375 millimeters, drum feed almost exclusively on mussels. The 2013 to 2023 trawl data puts average drum consumption at 512,602 pounds of mussels per square mile of lake bottom every single year. In 2013, the peak year on record, that number reached 1.2 million pounds per square mile, more than double the decade's average. Multiply that across the whole Western Basin, and you get a fish once considered worthless, quietly removing more invasive mussel biomass than any control program the state has ever funded. For most of the 20th century, drum were commercial bycatch nobody wanted, not the target species, not worth much at the dock. Nobody was tracking what those same fish were doing to the mussel population below the boat. It's the single largest documented predation force on zebra mussels anywhere in the Great Lakes system. And it still isn't the full answer, because Lake Michigan, Huron, and Ontario were losing mussels too, far from the drum's Lake Erie stronghold. One predator down, a big one, but a local one. The search moves 200 kilometers north and east to a different lake and a different kind of hunter entirely. At Point Pillet, on Lake Erie's Ontario shore, a seasonal predator shows up every autumn, lesser and greater scaup, diving ducks that stage here by the thousands during fall migration. In 1994, researchers Hamilton, Ankney, and Bailey published a study in the journal Ecology. Their method, wire exclosure cages that kept ducks out of test plots so their real impact could be measured against untouched ground. Ducks swallow mussels whole. Small stones sitting inside a muscular gizzard grind the shells to fragments before digestion even starts. The birds weren't random about it. They targeted medium and large mussels and mostly ignored the small ones. During the heaviest weeks of fall feeding, ducks reduced mussel biomass inside the study plots by 57%. On paper, that's a bigger single number than anything the drum produced. Here's what the highlight reel version leaves out. Despite that 57% drop in biomass, the study found no measurable change in the total count of mussels. The ducks took the big ones, the small ones kept multiplying underneath them. And the ducks were only there for a few weeks. By the following spring, researchers found the caged plots and the open plots had converged again, no lasting difference left to measure. A real predator, a real number, and a seasonal blip, not an explanation for a decline that lasted 15 years across 4 separate lakes. Even a stopover crowd thousands of birds strong only ever touches one narrow strip of shoreline, for one narrow window of the year, before moving on south. 2 predators down, and between them they still cover only a few weeks of the year, in 2 locations, on 1 lake. The third one doesn't fit the pattern at all, because on paper, it isn't supposed to be here either. Meet the round goby, a small, bottom-dwelling fish that has nothing to do with any species native to North America. The round goby is native to the Black, Caspian, and Azov Seas. It was first identified in the Great Lakes in 1990, in the St. Clair River, the same corridor, the same kind of ballast tank, just 2 years after the mussel it would end up eating. An invasive predator and its invasive prey, arriving from the same region, on the same kind of ship, 2 years apart. Nobody planned this. Nobody stalked the goby on purpose. It rode in by accident, twice. In 2001, researchers Juricic and Janssen compared zebra mussel populations at 2 sites, Calumet Harbor, where round gobies were dense, and Evanston, a nearby stretch of Lake Michigan shoreline with almost none. Laboratory feeding trials by Guidotti and colleagues had already clocked gobies eating 36 to 47 zebra mussels a day. For mussels under 4 millimeters, the smallest size class, that rate passed 100 a day. At Calumet Harbor, small mussels were almost gone from exposed rock surfaces. Only the largest ones, too big to fit in a goby's mouth, were left standing. At Evanston, without gobies, the full-size range was still intact. A separate study tracking a stream in southern Michigan found round gobies absent from certain sites in 2003 and already abundant there by 2006, and at those same sites, zebra mussels, along with amphipods, isopods, and other invertebrates, had measurably declined. And the round goby is not a quiet hero waiting in the wings. The same fish also eats the eggs and fry of native species, competing directly with the sport and commercial fish the Great Lakes economy depends on. Estimates put the round goby's total population across the Great Lakes in the billions. At that scale, eradication isn't a realistic goal for any agency. It's simply a fixture of the ecosystem now, for better and worse. It's real, it's measurable, and it's still not a native species avenging itself against an invader. It's one uninvited species accidentally thinning out another, one harbor at a time, while causing damage of its own. Add up the drum, the ducks and the goby, and the honest tally reads, one native fish doing most of the work in one basin, one migratory bird doing seasonal, localized damage, and one invasive fish skewing the harbor's mussels bigger on average, not fewer overall. 3 predators. 3 real, peer-reviewed, separately documented sources of mortality: a native fish, a migratory bird, an invasive goby. Stack them together and they still don't explain a population that fell from 98% of all mussels in a lake to under 3% in 5 years. So what actually happened in Lake Michigan between the year 2000 and 2005? A 4th species, not a predator at all, a competitor, the quagga mussel, a close relative of the zebra mussel from the same region that reached the Great Lakes roughly a decade after it did. Benthic surveys of Lake Michigan found zebra mussels made up 98.3% of all mussels collected in the year 2000. By 2005, quagga mussels made up 97.7%. The ratio didn't shift, it flipped completely. Zebra mussels need something hard to attach to, and they need shallower, warmer water that limits them to lake edges and hard-bottom zones close to shore. Quagga mussels don't need to attach to anything at all. They colonize soft, silty sediment in water more than 100 meters deep, depths a zebra mussel physically cannot survive in. Same food, same competition for space, but a far wider range of habitat to expand into. The quagga simply outbuilt the zebra mussel across most of its own territory. Think of it less as a fight and more as 2 tenants competing for the same building. One could only live on the upper floors, the other could live anywhere, including the basement. The building filled up from the bottom. Quagga mussels reproduce the same way zebra mussels do. Dreissenid research puts a single mature female at up to 1 million eggs a year, drifting as microscopic larvae for weeks before settling anywhere they can find room. Today, quagga mussels are the dominant mollusk in every Great Lake except Superior, with densities exceeding 10,000 individuals per square meter on hard surfaces in parts of Michigan, Huron, and Ontario. Lake Superior is the exception, and the reason is boring but telling. It's colder and lower in calcium than the other 4 lakes, conditions both mussel species still struggle to establish in at scale. That's the real answer to the dredge sample from the opening scene. The lakebed didn't come up empty because something ate what used to be there. It came up empty because something else took the space first. There's one more twist, and it's the one that should worry people who think this is good news. It has nothing to do with predators or competitors. It's a side effect of the mussels themselves, one that most people mistake for proof the lake is healthier than it used to be. A single mussel, zebra or quagga, filters roughly 1 liter of water a day, straining out microscopic plankton as it feeds. Multiply that by billions of mussels and the water itself changes. In parts of Lake Michigan, water transparency has roughly doubled since the invasion began. Sunlight now reaches depths it never used to. Clearer water sounds like an improvement. It isn't. Filtering out the plankton starves the bottom of the food web, the same plankton native larval fish and species like alewife depend on to survive their first year. At the same time, the mussels concentrate phosphorus and other nutrients near the shoreline through their waste, feeding heavy blooms of a stringy green algae called cladophora along beaches and rocky shorelines. Clearer water, more shoreline algae, less food for native fish. The lake looks healthier from a boat. Underneath, the food web is smaller than it was 30 years ago. Older lake surveys describe water-clouded green with plankton for most of the summer. Recent ones, at the same sites, describe the bottom as visible from the surface on a calm day. Clarity this dramatic is easy to read as good news from the surface. It isn't. It's a symptom of a food web being squeezed toward the shoreline and toward the lake bottom, closer to the mussels themselves. They aren't even the only ones. Crayfish pick at smaller mussels. American coots feed on them alongside diving ducks. Sturgeon and catfish take them opportunistically. None of these was ever going to be the single answer. The question was always the wrong shape. So, the drum, the ducks, and the goby are all real, all documented, all still out there working. Each removes mussels in a different season, a different size class, a different stretch of shoreline. But stack all 3 together, and they still can't account for a species that dropped to 3% of its own historic population inside 5 years. Competition did that. Predation just cleaned up around the edges of a fight the zebra mussel was already losing. That's not a smaller story than the one the viral videos tell. It's a bigger one, It just doesn't fit in a single dramatic thumbnail with one hero and one villain. So no, nothing in the Great Lakes is quietly avenging itself on the zebra mussel. That version makes a better thumbnail than it does a fact, and at least 3 channels are currently running with it. Watch closely, and those videos never mention the quagga mussel at all. Leaving it out isn't a small omission. It's the difference between a comeback story and a replacement story. The real outcome isn't a win either. Quagga mussels are harder to remove than zebra mussels ever were. They live deeper. They don't need a hard surface, and regional control costs are still running about $500 million a year. One invasive species didn't lose to nature fighting back. It lost to a worse invasive species that happened to be better at the exact same job, and the lake is still paying for both of them. It also changes what solved should mean to policymakers. A population crash isn't proof a threat is gone. Sometimes it's proof a bigger one already moved in. 3 of the species in this story, the zebra mussel, the round goby, and the quagga mussel that finally outcompeted both, arrived within the same 30-year window through the same handful of shipping routes. That part isn't a coincidence. It's a supply chain. The pattern is worth remembering the next time a video promises a tidy comeback story. Real ecosystems rarely resolve that cleanly. Usually the honest answer involves 4 species, 3 decades of data, and no clean winner. None of that makes the drum, the ducks, or the goby any less real. It just means none of them get to be the whole story by themselves, and neither does the villain that finally showed up to replace one invader with another. This channel exists to run down exactly this kind of story, the version that's true, not just the version that's viral, before the copycats flood the search results with the wrong one. If you want the next one before the copycat channels catch up, subscribe now, and tell me in the comments which invasive species you want investigated next.